Hello, my dear ones. Welcome to Mama Joyce's Stories, a quiet place where heart speaks softly and memories find their way home. Here, I share tales of love, loss, forgiveness, and the gentle lessons life leaves behind. So make yourself a cup of tea, settle in, and let your heart rest for a while. Now, my dear ones, let's move toward our story for today.
When people talk about the past, they often say time heals everything. But I've learned that sometimes time doesn't heal. It just hides the pain under layers of silence. And one day, when you least expect it, the truth finds a way to speak again. It was a quiet Sunday evening when my daughter, Sarah, finally told me what really happened that night. For 15 long years, I had lived believing one version of the story, the version she allowed me to believe. I thought I had moved on. I thought I had forgiven. But in that moment, as she sat across from me at my kitchen table, her hands trembling over a cold cup of tea, I realized that everything I knew about that night was wrong. I remembered the smell of rain in the air that evening. The house was silent, except for the ticking clock on the wall. She had called earlier in the day, saying she wanted to visit, something she hadn't done in months. Her voice on the phone was different, softer, almost afraid. A mother knows when her child carries a heavy heart, no matter how many years have passed. When she arrived, I noticed she looked smaller somehow, not physically, but inside. Her eyes carried a weight I couldn't name. We sat in the kitchen, the same one where she used to do her homework, the same one where I used to braid her hair before school. Now we were two strangers trying to find words that could reach across years of distance. For a while, we talked about simple things, her job, the weather, how the old house still smelled like cinnamon and detergent. But I could feel something pressing behind her words. There was a tension in the air, like a thread pulled too tight, ready to snap. Finally, she said, "Mom, do you ever think about that night?" The way she said it made my chest tighten. 15 years. 15 years since that night. The night her father died. I nodded slowly. Every day, I said. Why? She looked down at her hands, and for the first time, I saw a tear slip from her eyes. "I need to tell you something," she whispered. Something I should have said a long time ago. My breath caught. I didn't move. I didn't speak. Because deep down, a part of me had always known there was something more to that night, something she never said. I wanted to reach out, to comfort her, but something inside told me to wait. She needed to say it her way. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she said softly. "I was scared, Mom. I didn't know what to do." Her words trembled in the air like fragile glass, and in that instant, 15 years of silence, guilt, and confusion began to crack open. The rain outside grew heavier. Thunder rolled in the distance. It was as if the sky itself was remembering. I stared at her, trying to hold my breath steady. "What are you trying to tell me, Sarah?" I asked. But my voice sounded far away, like it belonged to someone else. She looked up then, and the pain in her eyes broke me. Dad didn't just fall, Mom. He wasn't alone that night. My whole body went cold. It felt like the world stopped spinning. And for a moment, all I could hear was the rain. I didn't ask another question. I couldn't. My heart wasn't ready for the truth, but it was already too late, because the truth had finally come home. They say the truth sets you free, but that night as I sat across from my daughter, trembling, broken, trying to speak, I learned that sometimes the truth doesn't free you. Sometimes it only shows you how long you've been living in a cage you never saw.
You know, when I think back to the years before everything changed, I remember laughter. Not the loud kind that fills rooms, but the soft kind. The kind that lives quietly in the corners of an ordinary life. We weren't rich or fancy or perfect, but we had something I thought was enough. We had each other. Daniel, my husband, was a quiet man. He wasn't one to say much, but when he loved you, you felt it. Every morning before work, he'd make me a cup of tea, 1 spoon of sugar, a little extra milk, just the way I liked it. He'd hand it to me and say, "You need something warm before facing the day." And somehow, that small habit, it became a promise that no matter what happened out there, we'd face it together. And then there was Sarah, our daughter, our light. She was curious, gentle, always humming when she worked. She loved animals, helped her friends with homework, and apologized for things that weren't even her fault. She had her father's calm, my stubbornness, and a heart too soft for this world. We lived in a small house on the edge of town. It wasn't much, 2 bedrooms, an old porch, and lilac bushes that bloomed every spring. Sarah would always pick a few flowers and place them in an old jar on the kitchen table. Every time I walked past, that little jar reminded me how love can make even simple things beautiful. Life wasn't easy. Daniel worked long hours, and I took sewing jobs to help with bills. But somehow we made it work. There was comfort in routine. Dinner at 7, Sarah's laughter in the hallway, Daniel humming old country songs while fixing the radio that never quite worked. One summer evening, Sarah was sitting by the window, looking out at the stars. She must have been around 12. I asked her, "What are you thinking about, sweetheart?" She said, "I was just wondering if Dad ever gets lonely on those late shifts." I smiled and told her, "No, love, he's got a whole city to keep him company." But she just looked at me quietly, and something in her eyes, something I didn't understand back then, stayed with me. Sarah was always a deep thinker, sometimes too deep. I wish I had listened more closely to those quiet moments, the ones that seemed small but were actually trying to tell me something. The questions she didn't ask, the night she came home quieter than usual, the way she sometimes flinched when Daniel walked into the room. But I didn't see it then. Or maybe I didn't want to. As she grew older, things began to shift. She spent more time alone in her room. She stopped humming, stopped talking to us about her day. I told myself it was just teenage years, the natural distance that comes between mothers and daughters. But deep down, I knew it was something else. One evening, I knocked on her door. She didn't answer, so I opened it gently. She was sitting on the floor, holding an old photograph of one of her and Daniel from her 10th birthday. Her eyes were red. I asked her, "Are you crying, sweetheart?" She quickly wiped her face. "No, Mom, I'm fine." Then she smiled, but it wasn't real. I knew it wasn't real. And still, I said nothing. Maybe I was afraid of pushing too hard. Maybe I was afraid of what I might find if I did. So I just kissed her forehead and left. That moment, that tiny, ordinary moment, would haunt me for years. Later that same night, Daniel came home late, much later than usual. I heard the door open softly, his footsteps moving through the hallway. He thought I was asleep, but I wasn't. I lay there listening to the silence between us. There was something in that silence, something heavy, something I couldn't name. After that night, things slowly started to change. Sarah withdrew even more. Daniel became distant, quieter, and I began to feel like a stranger in my own home. Sometimes I'd walk past her room and hear her crying softly. I'd stand outside her door, my hand on the knob, but I never opened it. I just told myself she needed space. How wrong I was. Then came that night, the night that would change everything. The night that would live in my chest like an echo I can't escape. It was cold. Rain was falling softly against the windows. Sarah had said she was staying at her friend's house to study. Daniel had left earlier, saying he had to check something at work. So I made soup. I remember stirring it slowly, humming without thinking, waiting for both of them to come home. It was supposed to be an ordinary night, just like any other. But if I've learned anything, it's this. You never know which ordinary day will be the one that breaks your life in half. I didn't know that by the time the soup cooled, everything I thought I knew about my husband, my daughter, and myself would change forever. I didn't know that the silence in that house was already hiding something terrible. And I didn't know that for the next 15 years, that silence would become my closest companion. If I could go back, even for a few minutes, I'd sit with her a little longer that night. I'd hold her hand and say, "Whatever it is, you can tell me." I'd tell Daniel that I loved him, not in passing, not as part of the routine, but with the full truth of my heart. But life doesn't let you rewrite your story. It just makes you live with the pages you didn't mean to write. You know, it's strange how a home can stay the same, even when the people inside it begin to disappear. The walls still hold the pictures. The floor still creaks the same way. But the warmth goes missing. That's what happened to us. Little by little, the light in our house started to dim. And I didn't even realize it was happening until it was already dark. After that winter, Daniel became distant. He still went to work, still smiled at neighbors, still brought me my morning tea, but it wasn't the same. There was a tiredness behind his eyes, the kind you can't cure with rest. And Sarah? She had started avoiding him. She'd wait until he left the room to come sit with me. Sometimes when she heard his car pull into the driveway, she'd quietly walk back to her room without saying a word. At first, I thought it was just teenage rebellion. Maybe they had an argument I didn't know about. But it wasn't that simple. There was something else. Something I couldn't see, but I could feel. One afternoon, I was folding laundry in the living room when I heard them talking in the kitchen. Their voices were low, tense. Sarah said something I couldn't quite catch, her tone sharp, defensive. Then Daniel's voice, firmer than I'd ever heard it before. And then silence. When I walked in, they both looked startled. Sarah's eyes were wet. Daniel's jaw was tight. I asked, "What's going on?" Daniel said, "Nothing, just a small disagreement." Sarah stood up and muttered, "I'm going to my room." And just like that, it was over, at least on the surface. But a mother knows when something is deeply wrong. That night, Daniel didn't touch his dinner. He kept staring at his hands, lost in thought. When I asked what was bothering him, he simply said, "She's growing up too fast." Then he smiled, a small, sad smile, and went to bed early. I wanted to believe that was all it was, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was standing on a bridge that was beginning to crack. Days passed like that. The tension grew. Sarah became quieter, more withdrawn. She stopped going out with her friends. She barely looked her father in the eye, and sometimes, when Daniel spoke, I could see her flinch. Just a tiny movement, but enough for a mother to notice. One night, I decided to talk to her. I knocked on her door. No answer. So I opened it slightly and saw her sitting on the floor holding something, a small folded piece of paper. When she saw me, she quickly hid it under her pillow. "Sarah?" I said gently, "Are you okay?" She forced a smile. "Yeah, Mom, I'm fine. Just tired." I sat on her bed. "You don't seem fine, sweetheart. You haven't been yourself lately." Her eyes filled with tears. She looked at me as if she wanted to speak, really speak, but couldn't. Then she shook her head. "It's nothing, Mom. Don't worry about it." I wanted to hold her, to tell her she could tell me anything, but there was a wall between us, invisible, but real. And I didn't know how to climb over it. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about her face, her trembling hands, the sadness she tried to hide. Something inside me whispered that I was missing something important, something that could change everything. A few days later, Daniel came home later than usual again. When I asked where he'd been, he just said, "Work ran late." His tone was calm, but his eyes, they told another story. I said, "You've been working late a lot lately. Is everything okay?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Everything's fine, Mary. Don't worry." Then he kissed my forehead and went to bed. That's when I noticed the faint smell of alcohol. Not strong, just enough to make me pause. Daniel wasn't a drinker. At least he hadn't been before. I remember standing in the kitchen that night, staring at the empty hallway, feeling something inside me start to twist. It was like watching clouds gather, knowing a storm was coming, but pretending it wasn't. The next morning, Sarah didn't go to school. She said she felt sick. I stayed home with her, made her soup, and sat by her bed. She barely spoke. At one point, I reached out and touched her hand. It was cold, trembling. When I asked if something had happened at school or with her friends, she shook her head again. "No, Mom. It's just life." Then she turned to face the wall. I sat there for a long time, listening to her quiet breathing, wishing I knew how to make things right. By that evening, Daniel and I barely spoke. He came home, ate in silence, and went to his study. I washed dishes alone, listening to the sound of rain against the windows, the same sound that would later haunt me. That's when I made a mistake I'll never forget. I went into Daniel's study, not to snoop, just to clean up, I told myself. But deep down, I think I was looking for answers. On his desk, under a pile of papers, I found a letter. It wasn't sealed. It wasn't hidden well, just lying there, like it was waiting to be found. It was from Sarah. The handwriting was hers, small, neat, careful. I didn't mean to read it. I really didn't. But the first few words caught my eye. "Dad, I can't keep this secret anymore." My heart stopped. I froze. I read only a few lines, just enough to know something terrible was buried between them. Before I could finish, I heard footsteps in the hall. Daniel's. I quickly folded the letter and placed it back, pretending I hadn't seen a thing. That night, I lay awake beside him, listening to the rhythm of his breathing, and all I could think about was that one line, "I can't keep this secret anymore." What secret? What could possibly make my daughter write something like that to her father? I didn't know it then, but that was the beginning of the end. The days that followed were quiet, too quiet. Daniel avoided me. Sarah stopped speaking to him entirely. The house felt like a museum of unfinished conversations. Until that night. That awful, unforgettable night. It started like any other. Rain falling softly, a chill in the air, dinner on the stove. Sarah had gone out again, said she needed some air. Daniel said he was heading to the office. I remember watching him leave, the way he looked back at me as if he wanted to say something but didn't. That was the last time I saw him alive. Hours later, the phone rang. I still hear that sound sometimes. Sharp, cold, cutting through the quiet. When I picked it up, I heard a voice I didn't recognize. A man from the hospital. He said Daniel had been in an accident. He said it was raining, that his car had gone off the road near the old bridge. I dropped the phone. I remembered the soup boiling over, the smell of burnt food filling the air. I remembered the sound of Sarah's footsteps behind me as she came through the door. And I remember her face when she heard the words. She didn't cry. She just froze. That night, everything stopped. But what I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that the truth about that night wasn't buried in the rain or the crash. It was buried in Sarah's silence. And for 15 years, she carried that silence until the day she finally told me what really happened that night. It took me years to even say his name out loud again. After Daniel's death, everything in our house went silent. The laughter, the warmth, even the arguments, gone. It was as if the walls themselves went into mourning. Sarah stopped speaking for a long time. At first, I thought it was grief. I told myself she just needed time. But time came and went, and she never talked about that night. She never asked about the funeral, never mentioned her father's name, not even once. I tried to pull her back into life, little by little. I cooked her favorite meals, left her notes on the fridge, asked her to help me with errands. She smiled, she nodded, but she wasn't really there. She was somewhere far away, lost in a place I couldn't reach. People said we were lucky to have each other, but sometimes two broken hearts can't hold each other up. They just sink together. Years passed that way. She went to college, then got a job in another city. We talked on the phone now and then, but only about small things. She avoided anything real. I didn't push her. I had learned that sometimes silence is the only way people know how to survive. Still, every time it rained, I thought of that night. The sound of it on the window always brought back the same questions. What really happened? Why was Daniel out there so late? Why did Sarah look so pale when she came home right before the call? But I buried those thoughts deep inside me, because being a mother sometimes means choosing not to ask what your heart already fears. And then, 15 years later, she came home. She called me one morning and said, "Mom, can I come by tonight? I need to talk to you." Her voice was soft, almost shaking. Something inside me knew. This was it. When she arrived, she looked different. Older, yes, but also tired in a way that had nothing to do with age. She sat at the same kitchen table where we used to eat breakfast together, her hands wrapped around a mug she didn't drink from. We spoke about small things at first, her work, the weather, the neighbor's new dog, but I could feel the heaviness in her silence. Then, after a long pause, she said quietly, "Mom, do you still think about that night?" I told her the truth. Every day. She nodded, looking down at her hands. Her voice trembled. "There's something I need to tell you." I didn't move, didn't breathe. It was like every part of me froze, waiting for words I wasn't sure I wanted to hear. She said, "Dad didn't just have an accident." My stomach tightened. I whispered, "What do you mean?" She looked up and I saw it. The same haunted look she had that night 15 years ago. The same look I had tried to forget. "Mom," she said, her voice barely holding steady, "I was there." Everything around me went still. The air felt heavier. I thought I misheard her, but she kept talking, one sentence at a time, like she was walking barefoot through glass. She said, "I went to meet him that night. We'd been fighting for weeks, and I wanted to talk to him. He called me and said he was near the old bridge, waiting in his car. I didn't tell you because I knew you'd be upset." I just listened. I couldn't speak. My heart was pounding so hard it almost hurt. She continued, "When I got there, he was already drinking. I'd never seen him like that before. He looked broken, Mom. He started saying things that didn't make sense, that he'd lost everything, that he'd ruined our family. I didn't understand." She paused, her hand shaking. Then she whispered, "He told me there was something he needed to confess." My throat got dry. I asked, "What did he say?" She looked at me for a long time before answering. She said, "He said he was sorry for what he'd done to me." I couldn't process it at first. I thought maybe he'd yelled at her or been too harsh. But then I saw the pain in her face, deep, old, unspoken. And I understood. Not all at once, but enough to feel my heart tear in half. I said, quietly, "Sarah, what did he do?" She broke down then, her whole body trembling as years of silence came undone. Her voice came out between sobs. "Mom, it wasn't an accident. I ran away that night because I couldn't take it anymore. I didn't mean for him to go after me. I didn't mean for him to drive that way." I felt my body go numb. Every memory of that night, the rain, the phone call, her face suddenly made sense in the worst way. She said she had tried to tell him she'd had enough, that she couldn't keep his secret anymore. She said he begged her not to say anything, and when she left, he followed her into the storm. He was drunk, angry, crying. She said she saw his headlights in the mirror, and then they disappeared. She stopped talking after that, just sat there shaking. I couldn't find any words. There are no words for something like that. We sat in silence for a long time. I looked at her, my little girl, the same one who used to braid flowers into her hair, and I realized she had been carrying this alone for 15 years. I wanted to hate him, but all I felt was sorrow. For her, for him, for the life we lost and the love we broke trying to protect it. Finally, I reached across the table and took her hand. She tried to pull away, but I held on. And I said the only thing I could manage to say. "It's over now, sweetheart. You don't have to carry it anymore." She cried like a child then, not the quiet tears of guilt, but the kind that come from release. And I cried with her. That night, we didn't talk about forgiveness. We didn't talk about blame. We just sat there, holding on to each other, Two broken hearts trying to remember how to beat again. She finally told me what really happened that night. And though the truth shattered everything I thought I knew, it also gave me something I